What is up, party people? We are back with our animal reproduction and development PowerPoint video. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Go ahead and pause for today's objectives. And we're going to start with animal reproduction. Reproduction is vital to the survival of any species, and animals reproduce through a variety of methods. The first is asexual reproduction, which is where a single individual can reproduce themselves, resulting in a genetically identical offspring. You can have this through fission, which is used by some multicellular invertebrates, such as a sea anemone, where the individual splits into two, or a portion of the individual splits off and then becomes a second individual. But keep in mind, this has to be a large enough portion to have all of the necessary pieces and parts to be able to grow into that second individual. There's also budding, which is utilized by some invertebrates like coral and hydra. It's an outward growth, a bud, from the parent that separates and develops into a new individual. We also have fragmentation. This is where a portion of the individual breaks off and develops into a new individual if, again, the broken part is large enough, and most commonly, this is seen with starfish. We also have parthenogenesis, which is occurring in several invertebrates like bees, wasps, ants, and a few vertebrates like reptiles, fish, amphibian. And it's where a non-fertilized egg can develop into a complete individual. And this ensures species survival if individuals are separated from reproducing sexually. And this is for animals who reproduce this way because they can also reproduce sexually or asexually. It completely depends on their environment and the current situation that they are in. So essentially, fertilized or non-fertilized egg. It also determines the sex, which can vary by species. The opposite of asexual reproduction is sexual reproduction, and this is reproduction that requires two individuals, resulting in a genetically unique offspring. The sex determination varies by species. We'll get into that a little bit later. But hermaphroditism is an individual that is both male and female and capable of reproducing with or without a mate through self-fertilization. It's used by some invertebrates, slugs, snails, earthworms, clams, barnacles as well. And essentially the environment of some species develop into a male or female based on environmental conditions, like temperature. There are some species that can also alternate and change their sex based on the needs of the population. It could be once, it could be multiple times. Primary example of this would be clownfish, where almost every single clownfish is a male with one female. But if that one female dies, then one of the male clownfish will adapt and become the next female clownfish. Genetics. Most animal species determine sex based on the presence of specific chromosomes. For humans, at least, we have XX or XY. So XX female, XY for male. But other animals also use chromosomes, but different letters, like birds. Birds use ZZ for male and ZW for female, which is literally, you're just flipping what humans are. And some species are primarily genetic based, but also some can be influenced by environmental conditions, again, like temperature or what they're fed. Fertilization is the first step in development of a new individual through sexual reproduction. It's the joining of the sperm and the egg, resulting in a zygote. There are different types of fertilization. There's external fertilization, where the fertilization occurs outside of the body, most commonly in aquatic environments where both gametes are released into the water. There's also random fertilization, which means there's no mate choice at all. Internal fertilization occurs inside the body, and there are a few different types. We have oviparity, which is following internal fertilization. The eggs are laid outside of the body to complete development, and they receive their nourishment from a yolk. So think of a bird. All birds, most bony fish, some cartilaginous fish, and many reptiles, most amphibians, and two mammals actually do this. I believe one is a platypus. And then we have ovoparity, and this is where fertilized eggs remain in the female, but the yolk provides nourishment, and the young are fully developed when hatched and released from the mother. This occurs in a portion of animals like bony fish, sharks, lizards, snakes, and invertebrates. But the difference between ovoparity and viviparity is the yolk versus the placenta. Humans rely on viviparity, which is where the fertilized egg develops inside the female and receives nourishment through the mother's blood, through the placenta, and then the offspring is born alive, not from an egg. Humans, most mammals, some fish. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about reproductive anatomy, so feel free to skip this portion of the video. This is your warning. Well, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get into it, starting with male reproductive anatomy. The first part is the penis, which is the organ that drains urine from the bladder via the urethra, and this is also the copulatory organ containing the erectile tissue. The scrotum is the external tissue that supports and protects the testes. The testes are the male reproductive organ that produces some male sex hormones and sperm. The semen is a mixture of sperm and spermatic duct secretions and glandular secretions. And then the seminal vesicles are the glands that secrete alkaline solution to promote sperm motility, and it accounts for about 60% of the seminal fluid. The seminiferous tubes are coiled inside the testes and it's the location of sperm maturation, spermatogenesis, which we will get into later. The prostate gland is a mix of muscle and gland. The muscle helps provide force for ejaculation, and the gland contributes to nutrition of the semen, and then the secretions account for about 30% of the fluid. And then the bulbourethral gland is the secretions that neutralize the urethra just prior to ejaculation. And then the urethra, which has been mentioned multiple times, is the common tube for urine and semen. The female reproductive anatomy, we have the ovaries, which carry and develop the eggs and produce some female sex hormones. The oviducts, or fallopian tubes, these can be used synonymously, transport the eggs from the ovaries to the uterus. The cervix is the gateway between the uterus and vagina. The uterus is the location of fetal gestation, also known as the womb. The vagina is the externally open common tube for intercourse, the birth canal, and the menstrual flow. Keep in mind today when we were doing our Jeopardy, don't say period. He wants you to say menstrual flow, which is the appropriate scientific term. And then our endometrium is the mucous membrane lining of the uterus that thickens during the menstrual cycle. Gametogenesis. This is the overall term. Keep that in mind, overall term, and then we break it down into the two parts. Gametogenesis is the production of haploid cells for sexual reproduction, gametes, through meiosis. Each gamete is genetically unique. Now we're trying to recall some of our semester 1 information. Now we're going to break gametogenesis down. For males, we have spermatogenesis, which is the production of male gametes, sperm, which occurs in the walls of the seminiferous tubules. The spermatogonia are the stem cells, 2N, diploid. They multiply by mitosis and develop into primary spermatocytes, still diploid. The primary spermatocytes, still diploid, undergo meiosis 1 to create two secondary spermatocytes, now we're haploid, which undergo meiosis 2 and create 4 haploid spermatids. The spermatids differentiate into mature spermatozoa without further diffusion, forming a tail, the flagellum, and they're released into the lumen of the seminiferous tubules as sperm, still haploid. One stem cell in the spermatogenesis produces 4 sperm, which are all viable, which is very different once we get to the female reproduction. On the other hand, we have oogenesis, which is the production of female gametes, eggs. It occurs in the outermost layer of the ovaries, and it begins prior to birth and development of the oogonia, which are the stem cells, and they divide by mitosis and result in the primary oocytes, which are diploid. At birth, a female has all of the primary oocytes they will ever have for life, which is millions, but these cells hold in prophase 1 for a very long time. From puberty to menopause, the primary oocyte completes meiosis 1, but it divides unequally. It results in 3 polar bodies and 1 secondary oocyte, which is haploid. Again, this is different from spermatogenesis, which produces 4 viable sperm. In oogenesis, there's only 1 viable egg produced. The other are 3 polar bodies. The secondary oocyte is now the egg. It'll undergo meiosis 2 and hold at metaphase 2. It'll be released during ovulation, only completed meiosis 2 post-fertilization, which results in an additional polar body. The ovum, which is the egg, 1 stem cell, again, produces millions of primary oocytes, but only 1 oocyte produces 1 ovum, 1 egg. Hormonal control. The reproductive and developmental processes are heavily controlled by hormones. The gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, is produced by the hypothalamus, and it acts on the pituitary gland to release the FSH and LH when the reproductive hormones are needed. FSH is the follicle-stimulating hormone. It influences pubertal development and functions as the ovary and functions of the ovaries and testes. It promotes the gametogenesis in both. The LH is the luteinizing hormone, and it regulates the production of secondary sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Testosterone is the primary male sex hormone. It's responsible for the development of secondary sex traits like muscle, deep voice, body and facial hair, sexual function, and the stimulation of spermatogenesis, which we went through previously. It's also regulated through negative feedback loops. I hope you remember that from our previous test and semester 1. Estrogen is the primary female sex hormone, which is responsible for the development of secondary sex traits like flared hips and breast development. It also regulates the menstrual cycle and general health like the heart and bones. Progesterone regulates the FSH and LH, and it helps regulate the menstrual cycle and prepares the uterus for pregnancy. The ovarian cycle is a monthly cycle, approximately 28 days, and it's the process where ovaries mature and release an egg for fertilization and produce hormones, estrogen and progesterone, to prepare for pregnancy. Ovulation is the release of a mature egg from an ovary. The menstrual cycle is also a monthly hormone-driven process, about 28 days, and it prepares the body for pregnancy by maturing an egg, thickening the uterine lining, and then shedding it in menstruation if a pregnancy does not occur. And then finally, menopause. Menopause is where the ovaries lose their sensitivity to FSH and LH, resulting in the cessation of menstruation. Menstruation stops, which means you can no longer get pregnant. Go ahead and pause here to get a closer look at everything I just said. All right, fertilization. In mammals, an egg has a protective layer on the outside of the glycoproteins called the zona pellucida. Pellucidea. Yeah, you try and pronounce that. The acrosomal reaction is where the sperm binds to the zona pellucida, and the acrosome, which is a cap-like structure on the sperm, releases an enzyme that then degrades the glycoprotein matrix. The membrane of the sperm and egg fuse, creating a hole where the sperm's nucleus and genetic material can open and enter the egg. Once the fusion occurs, a reaction takes place, hardening the zona pellucida, which then prevents polyspermy, which is where multiple sperm fertilize an egg, which results in a polyploidy, which is fatal. Once the sperm and egg join, the egg completes its final meiotic processes or phases, and fertilization occurs, combining the sperm, haploid, and the ovum, egg haploid, nuclei, chromosomes, resulting in a zygote, diploid. Once a zygote is formed, it immediately transitions into its developmental stages, the first being cleavage. This is the rapid cellular diffusion following the zygote formation that results in the formation of the blastula, which is the hollow fluid-filled ball of roughly 100 cells called blastomeres. This type of cleavage is based on the amount of yolk in the egg. Holoblastic cleavage is the total small amount of yolk because the mother's placenta provides the nourishment. This is for mammals. Meroblastic cleavage is partial, and there's a large amount of yolk from birds or others. Blastocysts are formed by the blastula, consisting of two layers of cells. The inner cell mass, which is the embryoblast, becomes the embryo, and it contains the embryonic stem cells. The trophoblast are the outer layer that provide the nourishment and contribute to the placenta formation. And then in gastrulation, the blastula folds in on itself and establishes 3 cell layers called germ layers, which then differentiate into different organ systems. The endoderm, which is the nervous system and epidermis, the mesoderm, which is the muscle and connective tissue, and the ectoderm, which is the columnar cells of the digestive system and other internal organs. Organogenesis is the next step, and it's the development of organs through the differentiation of germ cell layers and stem cells. It's coordinated through a highly complex system of signal cascades in gene regulation. The neural tube is a flat sheet of ectodermal cells called a neural plate, and it folds inward and rolls into the neural tube, which then develops into the notochord in vertebrates and the brain and spinal cord later on. The vertebrae axis formation is during oogenesis, and the axis, oogenesis. And the axis is formed, the orientation of right, left, dorsal, ventral, and then is directed through genetic and cell-to-cell signaling based on information of the notochord. Embryo development is very similar among a bunch of different species in the earliest stages, and this is actually cited as primary evidence in support of the theory of evolution. Pregnancy is the overall state of carrying a developing fetus, while gestation refers to the specific developmental processes that occur from conception, which is the moment of fertilization and zygote formation, to birth. The gestational period is the length of time from conception to birth, and it varies greatly among different animal species. A chimpanzee is roughly 237 days, that's almost a year. Straight-faced dunnart is the shortest with 11 days. African elephants are the longest with 640 days. That's roughly 2 years, guys. The beluga whale is slightly less than that, and that is 460 days. And then humans are roughly 266 days, approximately 40 weeks or 9 months. This also varies from individual to individual, but we're all around the same point. Conception is the moment when sperm and egg combine to become a zygote. The sperm travels through the cervix and uterus up the fallopian tube or oviduct, where it's fertilized by the egg. Once fertilization and the zygote travel down the tube, and it must implant into the uterine wall within 7 days to survive. When that doesn't happen, the menstrual cycle occurs with the shedding of the uterine lining. But if it does happen, the zygote will then digest some of the cell in the uterine wall, and then it will release a hormone, the human beta chorionic gonadotropin. You can use an acronym for this one, beta HCG. And it's present in blood or urine serum, and it's used for pregnancy tests. So when you take a pregnancy test, this is what it is testing for. It's testing for the presence or absence of beta HCG. Human gestation is divided into 3 growth periods called trimesters. The first trimester is the conception to about 13 weeks, which is the implantation, rapid development, and organogenesis. It becomes a fetus at roughly 10 weeks, where all major organs are already forming. The heart starts beating around 5 weeks, and sex organs differentiate around 8 weeks. That doesn't mean you can tell the gender at 8 weeks, but it means that they're there. And then significant hormonal changes in the mother are accompanied by symptoms like nausea and fatigue. Nutrition and waste are provided by the endometrial lining through diffusion in the first few weeks, transitioning to the formation of the placenta, which is the organ responsible for the nutrition and waste management in the growing fetus. The mother's blood transports the nutrition and waste to and from the placenta and provides antibodies like IgG, immunoglobulin gamma, which we talked about in a previous presentation. Either way, it helps protect the fetus from infection. The end of the first trimester, the baby is about the size of a plum, 3 inches. And apparently, it is common to compare pregnancy to fruit, just to get the idea of how big the baby is. The second trimester is roughly 13 to 28 weeks, and it's the significant growth period where movement is felt as the reflexes develop. The mom's symptoms from the first trimester fade because the hormones are about evening out, but by 24 weeks, you should know this date or this time period, the fetus can survive premature birth. It will require medical intervention, but it is considered viable. The end of the second trimester, the baby is about the size of an eggplant, 14 inches, just over a foot long. The third trimester is 27 to 40 weeks, or the end of the period of birth. It's significant because the fetus gains weight and it grows significantly. The final maturation of organs, the brain undergoes rapid development, lungs prepare for breathing, senses, eyes open, they detect, they respond to light. They also respond to sounds, mostly the mom's voices, but both parents, or music, depending on how often you play it. Some people believe in playing Mozart frequently for your baby to make it more intelligent. I don't know if that's proven, but I've heard about it. The baby will turn in preparation for birth. You want the baby facing downward. If not, it's considered breached, and that is not the best for the mother. The mother's breast will prepare for breastfeeding a newborn, and full term is considered 39 weeks. The baby is about the size of a watermelon. Here is a chart to see what I was just referring to. Labor. Labor is the physical effort of pushing the baby and placenta out of the mother's body. The first stage is where the cervix thins and dilates to roughly 10 centimeters. Stage 2 is where the uterus contracts and the mother compresses the abdominal muscles. This is the pushing and expelling of the baby. Stage 3, the baby is out and now the placenta releases from the uterine lining and then is expelled from the mother's body, also by pushing. Now, this can happen naturally, or if there are complications, which can happen, there is another option, which is a C-section or a cesarean section, which is a surgical alternative to labor that removes the baby and placenta through the abdominal wall. Contraception. This is the prevention of joining of sperm and egg. There are different types. You can have a barrier, which prevents a physical barrier between the sperm and egg, or a chemical barrier. You can have a hormonal barrier, which uses a synthetic hormone to disrupt the normal release of FSH and LH, which prevents the egg from fertilization. And any other form of contraception, which is a method other than physical barrier or hormonal control, which vary greatly in effectiveness. Make sure to talk to your doctor. I am not a doctor. Miscarriage. Miscarriage is the sudden loss of a pregnancy before 20 weeks, and it's health, maternal age, drug use, chromosomal issues, all of these can lead to a miscarriage. You can also have everything right and still have a miscarriage. But it's a hard thing to go through, but the best way to try and prevent a miscarriage is to make sure that you're avoiding drug use, alcohol, any other thing that could be harmful, making sure that your health is as pristine as you can. Infertility. It's the inability to conceive or carry a child from conception to birth. Things like genetics, illness, developmental issues, serious injuries, surgeries, or exposure to toxins, and there's so many other factors that can cause infertility. Individuals who suffer with infertility often refer to IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, and it's an assisted reproductive technology where sperm and egg are joined outside of the body in vitro and then transplanted into the uterus, which is in vivo. I hope you guys learned something from this video. Feel free to drop any comments below and make sure to watch all the videos for this unit so that you can ace this test.